Okay, here we go. Well, hi, Padma.
Hey, Bhima.
Thanks for taking this time to share your story with all of us. I wanted to start just by saying, for everybody who's watching, and when we first put it up, and also years from now, the primary meaning of this project. This is actually the first interview that we're doing with the Seattle Sangha stories. But the primary meaning is just for us here in the Ananda Sangha here in Seattle to perhaps get to know each other and to not only hear some of these stories that we've heard before, but to get them down so that we can set the record straight, on one level, but also, there's so many details in everyday life, and sometimes we forget how our friends came on the path and when they did. And then it's also for those of you who haven't found Ananda and haven't met any of us before. This could be a really cool way to see that these people that you might see on a website or on an email header are actually real people, and share a lot of the same life experiences and inspirations as you do. So that's that. So Padma, I wanted to begin by just, and I want to also thank Nayaswami Asha for some of these sample questions. I found they were really insightful in a recent series that she did. So thank you, Asha. Padma, just to begin with, just a few questions about your early childhood, starting there. How were you brought up? What kind of a child were you? Were you reflective? Were you more active? What were your active interests at that age in your life? When were you always a serious thinker? Or did you always think about God, or did that come later?
Good question. I was always thinking about universal thoughts, even as a very young child. I was born and raised in a Dutch colony at the time in the northern part of South America, Dutch Guiana, Suriname. My parents were Dutch. We spoke Dutch. We immigrated when I was 10 to America. But I've shared with some that even as a very young child, maybe 6 years old, I remember going just before falling asleep at night, sort of seeing myself pulled back from the earth, looking back as if from the moon or something, and just seeing all these little ants crawling around on the planet. And they were all like little sparks. And I had this insight, even at that age, that we were all a spark of one great light, one great fire, but it was more like light. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling my mother about it the next morning, and she sort of patted me on the head, and she said, "Don't think about those things." She said, "People have gone crazy in their lives just thinking about thoughts like that." So she did not encourage that kind of thinking. Mm-hmm. But it was a Jewish, non-religious family, agnostic to atheistic. And I always was thinking about God or light in one form or another.
So that the support for your spiritual search did not come from your parents then?
It did not, except that it was a goad.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it got you.
In fact, I remember looking around me, and even though my family was Dutch, it was in the northern part of South America, so people were pretty Latin in their expressions. And I remember looking around me and thinking, I don't want to grow up like that. And so when I first met up with meditation in my very beginning of college at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, I remember just glomming onto it. This is what I wanted. Yeah, stillness.
I'm hearing a little bit of my own echo here. Let me see if I can fix that. Are you hearing that?
I am a little bit.
Do you have at the top of your screen, does it have something that says turn on or turn off original sound?
Yes.
Can you turn it off if it's on?
Well, now it's blue and it says turn off original sound.
Yeah, click on turn off.
So I had it on to begin with. Yeah.
Oh, it was on. Okay, that should help.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, good. So when you were in Dutch Suriname, was there a Catholic or a church kind of influence there that you were aware of or around you?
Well, there was a Catholic school that my brothers ended up going to because it was the only private good school that existed. And so they went there, but my family was Jewish, and there were, there was a Jewish community that my mother especially tried to connect in with. Not the religious kind, but the social kind.
Sure. So it wasn't until college that you got that you received any exposure to spiritual ideas?
When we immigrated when I was 10, my parents were very open-minded. And so they let me, and I explored. I went to church with all my friends.
Oh, okay.
I went to Protestant churches. I went to Catholic churches. I went to synagogues, you name it, I went to it. But I didn't find Eastern philosophy and spirituality until I started college.
Got it. And so when you guys immigrated, where did you come to, rather?
Los Angeles, if you can believe it. Yeah. We immigrated to Van Nuys originally, and my parents were like gypsies energetically. And so we lived all up and down the California coast, and then we lived in Arizona for a while, in Tempe, a suburb of Phoenix.
Right.
And then ended up in Northern California in high school. I went to 17 schools in 17 years. It was crazy, on 3 continents in 2 languages.
So you did have some growing up in Holland then as well?
I did. I had a couple of years worth, about 2 years worth.
And then you were telling us at Sunday service a couple of weeks ago about your experience in an Eastern religions class. I think it was relating to Buddhism or Buddhist philosophy. Could you tell us about that experience?
It was Indian Buddhism, and there was this aha kind of moment that I had, because they talked about that everything material was really energy and made of energy. And I just remember it just exploded in my brain, that thought. I was so excited about it. And it was literally within days of that somebody handed me autobiography of a yogi. Mm-hmm. I was 19, and the rest was history.
When you read that in class, did any part of you hearken back to that early childhood memory of the points of light, or did those types of experiences stay with you through your adolescence at all?
Yeah, it wasn't like right in that same second, but it was within the same orbit of days that that thought came back to me as well. It just resonated, you
Right.
know, with all of that part of my, it was like a wake up, really. I
An
realize
awakening.
that now. Yeah,
Yeah.
a reawakening.
If you had parents, let's say, who meditated um, or were open like your mother wasn't, do you think you would have gotten on the path sooner?
You know, I wonder about that sometimes. I mean, we raised our two children at Ananda Village,
Yeah.
and my daughter, well, both of them have it in their DNA,
Yeah.
but our daughter Gita especially. But you know, she rebelled against it when in the teenage years, and she went out on a 15-year cycle before she made it back there. So who knows, you know, we just tend to rebel, and
Mhm.
and I may very well have rebelled. I just don't know.
That's true. Well, when you were handed the AY, the autobiography of a yogi, um, how how did you make that leap from that book, from seeing that book, reading it, and meeting Yogananda, to then coming to Ananda?
Almost instantaneously, Swami Kriyananda was just in the process of building the first temple. Actually, it was the second temple. The first one blew down at the old retreat. And the same friend who had handed me, it was really an acquaintance, it wasn't somebody I knew very well, told me that he was doing that and that you could go up there and stay on retreat if you did work exchange. So I just jumped right up there and did that, and met Swami Kriyananda right away. He was the one doing everything
Right. So
back
we,
then.
we, we skipped over it, but you went to college, and it was UC Berkeley, right?
Mm-hmm,
And that would have been what, in like 69 and 70?
mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you came to Ananda in 1970?
Right. I didn't move there in 1970. I kept commuting up. I was going to college. I had graduated from high school when I was 17, and I had taken a year to travel.
Okay.
And so that put me that was in 68. So then it was late 69 and early 70 that I was at Berkeley and first learned about Yogananda and Kriyananda, really within a couple of weeks of each
Wow.
other. I'm a slow reader. It took me a couple of weeks to read the book.
That's pretty dedicated, though. Wow. So tell us about that experience. It's 1970, and I believe it was 1969, which was the first full year of Ananda starting up there. And then this is in 1970. You're what, 18, 19 years old?
19.
And what was your impression of when you met Swamiji? What was that first experience? Can you tell us about how you met him and where, and then what you felt and what he said?
Yeah, I remember I got there late at night, and back then all you could do was camp. And so I was sleeping out under the stars, and I had a dream, and I dreamt that I had passed him on the pathway, and that he was just wearing a dhoti, and he looked at me when I passed him, and he said, can you help me? And it was interesting because the next morning, that's exactly how I met him. And I'm not one to have visions or, those kinds of things. But through the years, and when I actually started working very closely with him, I have a very strong memory that a number of times he'd say, "Thank you for helping. Thank you for helping me." And often it was about projects that I had done what I thought was completely myself. And I thought, well, that's an odd way of putting it, And then I woke up one day and realized, in understanding, and realized what he was saying was that when you serve with the thought of helping, you're less attached to it yourself, and it becomes easier to understand that you're not the doer.
Mm-hmm. It's like the baby step towards that.
Yeah, exactly. So he taught all the classes, he gave the Sunday service, he did everything back then. The meditation retreat was very rustic, and then the farm, we used to call it. It wasn't called the village yet, it was called the farm back then. Tended to be the place where some of the couples and families were living. But it wasn't, all the happening was at the retreat.
Right.
So I didn't spend hardly any time there.
And besides Swamiji, who was or who were, if there were several of the first people that you met at Ananda and became friends with?
Really, it was just a small group back then, and we all were friends.
Mm-hmm.
Devi and Jyotish weren't together yet. There were monastics and monks and nuns, and I remember Ananda, I remember Parvati, I remember Devi. We became very close. Jyotish, Bamal was more involved in running things back then with Jyotish. So Lakshmi, there were just maybe 20, 25 folks.
When you came up to the village that first time, was it with somebody who brought you there, or?
I was I was married actually to somebody else.
We skipped that.
We skipped that.
I guess he didn't stick around, huh?
That's right.
Okay. It wasn't part of the package.
Right.
Okay, and then let's see, how much time do we have? We have a little bit more time. So what was it that made you stay? What was it that you experienced at Ananda? You could have been like so many who just came and visited and took a class or whatever. But what was it that made you feel like this was the place that you wanted to make your home and your spiritual home?
Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda. I remember having this very conscious thought that if I lived in the time of St. Francis, would I be living down in Rome, or would I be living in Assisi, and be around him? It just never crossed my mind that I would want to be anywhere else. It was difficult. My family didn't support it. We immigrated in part so that the kids could go to university. I dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of challenges, but I just didn't want to miss the opportunity of learning from him about Yogananda and how to live a spiritual life.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. And then just in terms of these years now, because you've been at Ananda for a number of years now, what
50
years, what is it like looking back on a life at Ananda, and in what ways do you feel that you've grown spiritually from being here? And, one last thing would be, how has your relationship with Master, with Paramahansa Yogananda, deepened? Because before when you came, it was Swamiji. This is like 3 questions in one. But maybe just start at the beginning there with looking over your life at Ananda. In what ways do you think you've grown the most from being here?
Well, I want to clarify something. It was Swamiji because he so perfectly vibrated Yogananda's vibration. I wanted to learn about Yogananda from him. Mm-hmm. And that's the relationship that we had. I remember all those years signing my notes to him, yours in Master. It was always through Master, and that's what he held out for us.
Right.
So it wasn't personal to him. So I guess that was it. I just remember thinking I could live a very successful, normal life. I felt like I could do really almost anything I put my mind to doing, but I wanted to learn how to live my life for God. And I felt that I could learn that from him. So that was it. Does that answer your 3 questions?
Yeah, I think that answers it really, really well. Well, thank you, Padma. Thank you so much for sharing some of these, these anecdotes, but also your vibration, with everybody. It's a real treat, because there's many people who may have had similar upbringings, or young people who are experiencing that upbringing, who might see this and say, hey, you know what? There is something outside of my secular Jewish family, or there is, something besides honing my skills in the world. There is an alternative. Yeah.
Living simply.
Indeed.
God alone. Bless you. Thank you for doing this, Bhima.
Yep. Thank you, Padma.
Ciao.
Ciao for now.